We have an America that looks at Europe and thinks we're weak, and we are if we don't act. I think the most important thing on today's agenda is to continue the discussion about how to finance Ukraine from a midterm perspective in order to give them a position of strength and to ensure that they can maintain their own society. This was a very important decision leading up to the weekend by stabilizing the immobilization of Russian assets. And before the end of this week, we need to take the final step. I would say it's crunch time for Europe and Ukraine.
A warning from Moscow as Europe's plan to fund Ukraine with frozen Russian assets sparks a growing financial and legal storm. A senior aide to Russian President Vladimir Putin has said that European leaders are eroding the global financial system, one built largely around U.S. and Western interests, by pushing to use Russian funds frozen to finance Ukraine. The European Union is considering issuing Kyiv a so-called reparation loan backed by Russian sovereign assets frozen since the start of the war to help cover Ukraine's expanding budget deficit. Moscow, along with several critics in the West, argues the move would amount to an unprecedented seizure of a nation's wealth, carrying serious legal and financial consequences. Kirill Dmitriev, President Putin's advisor on international investment, said on Monday that panicked EU officials backing Kyiv are making a serious miscalculation. Dmitriev warned that asserting claims over sovereign reserves would undermine the entire system of national reserves, raising costs for participants across the global financial system. Russia will win in court and get the funds back. EU guarantors will pay Ukraine's bill. Euroclear and the euro system will suffer. At the center of the controversy is Euroclear, the Belgium-based clearinghouse where most frozen Russian assets are held. Euroclear, backed by the Belgian government, has emerged as one of the strongest opponents of the proposal, warning the move could expose the institution to massive legal risk, potentially even bankruptcy. On the other hand, EU talks on using Russian assets for Ukraine are getting increasingly difficult, according to the bloc's foreign policy chief, Kaja Kallas.
This is really a very important week for financing questions. We have different options on the table, and they will be discussed in the leaders' meeting on Thursday. What President Costa has said, we will not leave the meeting before we get result, before we get the decision on the funding for Ukraine. The most credible option is the reparations loan, and this is what we are working on. We are not there yet, and it is increasingly difficult, but we're doing the work. We still have some days.
As of December 2024, Euroclear held more than $47 trillion in assets for clients worldwide, including equities, domestic and international bonds, and other financial instruments. The firm says it operates under strong legal protections under Belgian law with a robust risk management framework. Europe's financial custody market is dominated by three major players: Euroclear, Luxembourg-based Clearstream, and Paris-headquartered Euronext, registered in Amsterdam. In total, 103 central banks worldwide rely on Euroclear to safeguard their foreign currency reserves. Senior financial figures, including European Central Bank President Christine Lagarde, have previously warned that pushing ahead with the reparation loan could damage the credibility and reputation of the EU's financial system. Last week, Russia's central bank took the dispute to court, filing a lawsuit against Euroclear at the Moscow Arbitration Court, seeking damages over the immobilization of its funds. As Europe debates how to finance Ukraine, the battle now stretches beyond the battlefield, into courtrooms, financial markets, and the foundations of the global monetary system.
We have to understand that Donbass is not Putin's endgame. If it gets Donbass, then the fortress is down, and then they definitely move on with taking the whole of Ukraine. And, if Ukraine goes, then other regions are also in danger. Russia has attacked at least 19 countries, some as many as 3 or 4 times. None of those countries has ever attacked Russia. So they don't need any security guarantees. The security guarantees are needed for everybody else.
European Union Foreign Policy Chief Kaja Kallas has issued a blunt warning over Russia's intentions in Ukraine, saying Moscow's war aims extend well beyond the Donbas region. Speaking amid intensified diplomatic efforts, Kallas said Russia's ambitions should not be underestimated. She warned that the coming days could decide Ukraine's future, calling it a break or take week for Kyiv. Kallas stressed that Russia is not focused solely on Donetsk and Luhansk in eastern Ukraine, but is pursuing wider strategic goals that threaten regional and European security.
Good morning, everybody. So this week is really intense diplomatic week. We have many discussions today, first on Ukraine. In terms of financing, it's a break or take week. These topics that we have, the decisions that we have to make to support Ukraine, I think are very, very important. We have made also decisions, or will make decisions today regarding the Shadow Fleet vessels. We have 40 additional vessels plus enablers. And this is all for depriving Russia of the means to fund this war. We also reached the target of the 2 million rounds initiative. This is necessary for Ukraine to defend itself. Well, what we have to keep in mind is that why countries want to be in NATO is because they don't want Russia to invade them, to attack them. And that's why Sweden and Finland joined NATO. That's why the Baltic states joined NATO, to have this defense umbrella, really. Now, if this is not in question, or this is out of the question, then we need to see what are the security guarantees that are tangible. They can't be, papers or promises. They have to be, real troops, real capabilities, so that Ukraine is able to defend itself. We have to understand that Donbas is not Putin's endgame. If it gets Donbas, then the fortress is down, and then they definitely move on with taking the whole of Ukraine. And, if Ukraine goes, then other regions are also in danger. We know this from the history, and we should learn from history.
What are your plans to support Ukraine in 2026 military and diplomatic?
Yes, like I said, this is really a very important week for financing questions. We have different options on the table, and they will be discussed in the leaders' meeting on Thursday. What President Costa said, we will not leave the meeting before we get the result, before we get the decision on the funding for Ukraine. The most credible option is the reparations loan, and this is what we are working on. We are not there yet, and it is increasingly difficult, but we're doing the work. We still have some days.
But was there any signs that the United States, for example, asks for the European Union to stay more balanced?
Well, these are European Union decisions, and we are taking into account our strategic objectives, which is really to put the pressure on the oppressor and the enablers. And that's why we have the sanctions in place. So this is our policy.
Commissioner, what do you make of the statement of the weekend to the area, all the sports in Belgium, sports alternatives and reparations? And Czechia also came out. Is the reparations loan idea losing the netting in Europe?
It is difficult, of course, as we know, different pressure from different sides. But we also need to be very, very clear-eyed. The other options are not really flying. We have tried that before. If you think about I think it was 2 years ago when I proposed the Eurobonds, it didn't fly because you need everybody on board. The reparations loan we can do with the QMV. Reparations loan is based on the Russian frozen assets. That means it doesn't come from our taxpayers' money, which is also important. And it also sends a clear signal that if you do all this damage to another country, you have to pay for the reparations. Well, of course, we have the QMV decision, but without Belgium, I think it would be Increasingly, it wouldn't be very easy because they have the majority of the assets. And I think it's important that they are on board, whatever we do. What I want to say is that, of course, some countries in Europe are more used to the threats presented by Russia than others. And I want to tell you that these are only threats. If we keep united, we are much stronger. And these are just threats that Russia is posing, even, what we have seen before. So I really want all of us to have clear head.
We have the same person before the war? When the Americans are giving security guarantees to Russia, especially that the talks now is about stopping NATO from extending?
Again, we have to be really clear-eyed. We have one aggressor and one victim. And the one that needs security guarantees is Ukraine, not Russia. Like I've said, in the last 100 years, Russia has attacked at least 19 countries, some as many as 3 or 4 times. None of those countries has ever attacked Russia. So they don't need any security guarantees. The security guarantees are needed for everybody else.